You've described Harvard as, I think, a trust fund kid who's never had to really work. Describe the revelation you had after October 7th. Sure. And made you realize there is rot in higher education and what you want to do about it.
Yeah. So, I had a very positive educational experience at Harvard. I went to Harvard Business School, and periodically I would go back to campus and I talked to students, but I wasn't that close to the campus. I had a daughter who graduated from Harvard, and that was sort of my first clue that the place had changed. And literally, for the first year or two after she graduated, anytime something related to capitalism would come up, she'd have a very negative reaction. And I thought this was strange. And again, not everyone has to believe in all the tenets of capitalism, but she was very sort of negative on capitalism. And October 7th happened, which was a very bad day, obviously, but October 8th on campus was worse because of how a meaningful subset of the students responded. 34 Harvard student organizations came out and said that Israel was entirely responsible for the acts of Hamas, solely responsible, at a time when the terrorists were still killing people, on Israeli soil. I thought this was obviously surprising and strange. I went up to campus. I met with students, met with faculty. Why are so many students taking the side of the terrorists? You can criticize Israel for lots of things, but this is a case where clearly, and what I heard was that this is sort of an ideology that has emerged at Harvard, but in higher education generally, that the world is a bicameral world. There are oppressors, and there are the oppressed. You're either in one category or another, and that your oppression relates to where you fit on sort of this hierarchy of intersectionality. If you're a woman, you're part of the oppressed class. If you're a person of color, if you're an LGBTQ person, if you're a successful person, or you're a white male, or you're Jewish, or you're Asian, well, you're an oppressor. Because, so this notion that you're only successful if you got there by, in effect, pushing down other people, where capitalism is a zero-sum game. If Jeff Bezos has 100 billion, that means that other people have 100 billion less. And this ideology is really something that has permeated certainly Harvard and other institutions, and it's led to, and a lot of it was driven by kind of this DEI. Now, I always thought of DEI as diversity being a good thing, equity. I thought of this as fairness, and inclusion. I thought, of course, we want to. I want Pershing to be a place where everyone feels comfortable. I want everyone to have the same opportunity. And it's great. I think there are lots of benefits in having a diverse university, diverse workforce, et cetera. But what this ideology became was a view of the world that I thought was a very harmful one. And what you've discovered about the governance, so to speak, of Harvard and these other institutions, quickly do on endowment. I mean, a little background. Back in 2008, 2009. Everyone had followed the Yale model, and they suddenly discovered they didn't have liquidity. Yet here we are today. These institutions, go quickly through Harvard, have a lot of illiquid assets, and they need cash. How did they get themselves in a position like that? They look rich, yeah, but they're cash poor. Yeah. So basically, Harvard is really mismanaged itself. If you think about the two places Harvard should be investing money. One is they should be growing their student body over time. I graduated, my class was 1,640. Graduating class this year was 1,700. They've grown 4% over 35, 36 years. So in terms of the service they're offering to the country, the number of slots relative to the growth in the population has declined. Percentage of US students versus foreign students went from a small percentage of foreign students to 27% of the most recent class. The result being that in terms of Harvard being a place to educate American leaders, they're not really satisfying that, they've made no progress whatsoever. If you look at the growth in the administration, however, there's been massive growth in both overhead and kind of staffing. The faculty has been flat for the last 15 years. So it's not like they're growing the faculty appointments. So now how have they been funding this? They've been funding this with an endowment, but also a huge amount of federal funding. A much larger amount over the last, whatever number of years. And they're very reliant on philanthropy from their alums. And what's happened is philanthropy is...
$8 billion of debt. Is that true?
That is true. So anyway, but they had a $53 billion endowment. Everything seemed fine. The problem they have is 80% of the endowment assets are in illiquid assets. Real estate, private equity, venture, and the probably most liquid of the 80% are hedge funds. But even those, they're required to lock up their capital. They rely on short-term funding from the government and from donors. The government funding has been largely turned off. The donor funding is, if you're a donor today, so they've been financing their operating expenses by borrowing money. They've gone from almost no debt to now $8 billion of debt. They've borrowed a couple billion in the last, I think, 18 months. I even question whether 53 billion is the accurate value. If they go to sell their illiquid assets, they're not going to get par. And so they found themselves, and so why have they done this? The answer is people who manage endowments don't want, private equity assets look less volatile than market assets because they don't get mark to market as often. And I think really by reason of many people wanting to keep their jobs, you put assets in assets that don't mark as often, you're less likely to look stupid, at least for some period of time. And I think that's led to a lot of endowments investing in illiquid assets.